On Christmas morning, Ethan unwrapped nothing. There was no gift anywhere with his name on it. His brother and sisters tore through pile after pile of presents. Then they turned on him, throwing the toys they didn't want, screaming for him to set everything up. His parents stood right there and said nothing. To understand how we got here, we need to go back. This is the story of Ethan, 18 years old, quiet, used to going without. You're watching Unspoken Files, and this is the story of how his family slowly picked who mattered most. Ethan was born when his parents, Michelle and David, had almost nothing. Every bottle, every blanket, every winter coat came from somebody else's old closet. Even his shoes were never quite the right size, passed down from a cousin 2 years older. He never knew anything different, because it was simply life. Then, around the time Ethan turned 5, things changed. David's job picked up. Michelle's hours steadied. The struggle that shaped Ethan's whole childhood quietly disappeared. It disappeared just in time for someone else to benefit from it. When Ethan turned 6, his brother Tyler was born. 2 years later came his sister Ava, then the youngest, Lily. Tyler, Ava, and Lily grew up in a different house than Ethan did, even though the address never changed. New clothes, new toys, whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted it. Ethan watched the gap grow wider year after year and said nothing for a while. Relatives noticed first. Aunts, uncles, both sets of grandparents saw how differently the kids were treated, and they were not quiet about it. One cousin's birthday party that year, Tyler and Ava demanded the cake be cut their way, and got it. Ethan hadn't even been allowed to pick his own cake flavor the year before. They called out the favoritism directly to Michelle and David's faces. They called out how spoiled Tyler, Ava, and Lily had become. Michelle and David heard none of it. Every time family pointed out the gap, they turned it back on Ethan. They accused him of complaining behind their backs, of stirring up trouble, of trying to make them look bad. But that wasn't the worst of it. Relatives started keeping their distance from family gatherings just to avoid the tension. The fights at home only got worse. Ethan would bring up the favoritism directly, and his parents shut it down every time. They called it jealousy. They called it drama. They never once asked why a teenager would feel that way about his own family. Then came the Christmas the whole family still talks about. Ethan's grandparents had asked him, like every year, to write a wish list. He handed it over weeks early. Michelle and David left his shopping until it was too late. By the time they remembered, the stores were picked clean. His list sat forgotten in a drawer. On Christmas morning, Ethan had nothing under the tree. Tyler, Ava, and Lily had piles of presents. Once the wrapping paper settled, the 2 youngest turned on him. They threw the toys they didn't want him touching straight at his face. They screamed at him to build and set up everything for them. Michelle and David stood right there. They said nothing. Ethan's grandparents found out exactly how it had gone. What happened next changed everything between both sides of the family. A war broke out over a teenager who had simply written down what he was told to ask for. 16 came and went the same way. Lily wanted to start advanced ballet. Tyler wanted to switch into a new football program. Both cost money. Both needed scheduling around. Ethan's birthday landed right in the middle of it. His parents made their choice. There was no birthday that year, not a cake, not a dinner, not one mention of the day. They had decided, without ever saying it out loud, that his 16th year wasn't worth interrupting two schedules for. That was the moment everything unraveled, even if it took 2 more years to actually happen. By 18, Ethan had stopped expecting anything to change. The fights kept circling the same drain. His parents kept defending Tyler, Ava, and Lily no matter what they did, and kept hearing every complaint as an attack on themselves. One night, after another fight that went nowhere, Ethan called his grandfather. Harold didn't hesitate. He told him to come whenever he was ready. After his 18th birthday, quiet and uncelebrated like the one before it, Ethan packed what he owned. He moved in with his grandparents. He didn't make an announcement. He didn't wait for permission. He just left. And once he was gone, something happened that no one in the family expected. Both sides, his mother's parents and his father's parents, stopped speaking to Michelle and David entirely. It wasn't really about choosing sides. It was about years of watching and years of being told they were wrong for noticing. Tyler, Ava, and Lily, raised exactly the way they'd been raised, had become impossible to be around. Nobody wanted them at holidays anymore. Nobody offered to babysit. Nobody fought for an invitation that used to come automatically. Michelle and David found themselves with no extended family, no holidays, no calls, just each other and 3 children nobody else wanted to deal with. Months went by like that. No invitations, no phone calls that weren't about logistics, just silence, stretching out further than anyone in that house had planned for. Eventually, the silence became too much for Michelle and David to sit inside. Months of empty holidays, months of phones that didn't ring. They reached out to Ethan, not with an apology, not with any real account of what they'd done. They said they wanted to work things out because the silence had become too heavy to carry. Ethan asked them plainly what exactly they wanted to work out. Michelle and David didn't bring up the favoritism. They didn't mention the Christmas with nothing under the tree. They didn't mention the 16th birthday that never happened. They said only one thing, that they didn't want this to ruin the family. Not what they'd done to him, not what they'd let Tyler, Ava, and Lily become. Just the outcome they hadn't planned for, the loneliness sitting in their own living room. Ethan still lives with his grandparents, Harold and Joan. They never once asked him to choose sides. They just opened the door when he needed somewhere to go. He hasn't given his parents an answer. Part of him wants the family back the way it was supposed to be all along. Ethan thinks about the version of his childhood he never got to have. Part of him knows that wanting it isn't the same as trusting it. For now, the house with the empty seat at the table is theirs to sit in. Ethan is no longer the one waiting. If you were in the situation, what would you have done? Tell us in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, you know where the subscribe button is.